The inspiration, in a nutshell, is South Africa and the legacy of the impact of people who have experienced incarceration here on this nation. It is evidence of what happens when incarcerated people are empowered and given opportunities to change the world. At Incarceration Nations Network, we are about pushing for smart justice. We recognize that prisons are not the way there, that we want to invest in communities and not in prisons. And we especially want to invest in the leadership of those who have lived experience of the justice system, as they are the ones with the wisdom to carry us forward away from the sort of tough on crime approach that is not working, that's not building safer communities, and toward a system of smart on crime that does indeed build safe communities. And so we are also very passionate at INN about transnational solidarity, the idea that we can learn and build together across national borders. And so this fellowship is really a merger of those things. It's a way to promote the safe communities approach by elevating the incredible work of those who are directly impacted, and a way to celebrate transnational work so that the fellows from around the world, from 10 countries around the world, can come to South Africa, an incredible country whose legacy has been honed by incarcerated individuals, and collaborate and build and move us to a better, safer, smarter world.
Mr. Ngxeke, we know that part of South Africa's own heritage and legacy has been pinned on former President Nelson Mandela, the world's most famous prisoner, he's been called. But how that title is applied to him is dependent on how they've seen his cause. Some have called him a revolutionary freedom fighter, but we know some have seen him in less than favorable terms. So tell us about your journey as somebody who's been formerly incarcerated and the importance of being part of such a project.
Yeah, thank you very much, ma'am. I really appreciate the opportunity. So having spent some time in prison, a length of 13 years, it has made me to realize the importance of time and the importance of building, using that time building a future that does not people live in fear, a future that people are being treated equally, a future that where kids can be able to play in the street, similarly to what King Martin Luther King has, the dream, whereby people are judged by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. So that is the kind of a future that I envisioned. And while I spent some time in prison, I had a privilege of spending some time in reading Dr. Nelson Mandela's book, The Long Walk to Freedom.
Mr. Ngxeke, are you able to share with us why you went to prison? Because, I mean, part of the stigma stems from this, the kind of crimes that people commit, and, the understanding of people really can be change makers.
Yes, thank you very much, ma'am, of which the crimes that I went into prison into are various crimes, and of which on this kind of a platform, I prefer not to share on any of those crimes, because we are looking in terms of how do we move forward after you have served some time in prison.
Okay. All right. So you were telling us the importance, you're saying you used to read Nelson Mandela. So how did that change your life?
So reading Dr. Nelson Mandela's book, it has made me to realize that even though you can be in the harshest conditions, there is a turning point, and there is a time of realizing that you need to be building just like the seed, and then to be growing towards a tree that can be able to feed thousands and thousands of people, So as much Dr. Nelson Mandela and myself were not in prison for the same reasons, but there are some lessons that can be gleaned through somebody who have spent some time in prison, and how you can be able to take those tools and use them when you're on the outside.
Dr. Dreisinger, I'd like to juxtapose South Africa and the United States. When we're talking about solidarity in terms of those who've been incarcerated, when you say you want to instigate innovative justice work worldwide. South Africa being a country that has experienced institutionalized racism. If you look at the United States, we're told that the highest number in terms of demographic is the African American population, which makes up a percentage or less of the total number of people in the United States. So how do you bridge these vast divides?
Well, actually, and doing this work globally, one of the things we recognize is there are far more similarities than there are differences when we talk about prisons and justice and the context for those two things. Because in fact, in countries all over the world, we must recognize that prisons are filled with the have-nots, with the others. And whether it's race or class that we're talking about, we know that prisons are systems of radical reflections of systems that are radically unequal. And they are products of systemic racism. They are products of systemic inequality. Whether we're talking about apartheid in South Africa, we're talking about Jim Crow in the US, we're talking about Aboriginal communities in Australia and New Zealand, and the list goes on. So in fact, prisons were designed to warehouse human beings and create the divide between the haves and the have-nots. They are products of systemic racism and systemic inequality. And again, I just keep emphasizing that they're not making us any safer. And by us, I mean South Africa, the US, Europe, whatever part of the world we're talking about. I think we all desire safe communities, and safe communities are hinging on equality and equity, as opposed to this tough on crime approach that is only harming and further traumatizing communities that have been harmed and traumatized by legacies of inequality, of systemic racism, wherever it is in the world.
So Dr. Dreisinger, let's then segue from imprisoned minds to these legacies of incarcerations. It's a global project, and you say there are more similarities than there are differences. But if we look at the United States, we're told it's the civilized world. It's the, the dominant one in terms of democratic principles. But if you look at the criminal justice systems of all of these countries that are involved in, these countries that you work in, what can we learn from and what can we move away from?
Well, I'm glad you bring that up about the US, because unfortunately, people point to the US consistently all over the world as this sort of model of things, when in fact, we are the world's greatest incarcerator. And, as we can see from yet another tragedy of a school shooting happening in the last week, it is not making us safer. It's not getting us to where we want to go. And so the sort of approach to mass incarceration of the US is not the one that we want to foist on the world. However, there's lots of good work happening in the US as well. And our fellows from the US, 4 of our fellows do come from the United States and are doing incredible work in the space of healing communities, of restorative justice, of reintegration work, of gang intervention work, things that we can certainly learn from wherever it is in the world. And likewise, this is true about all of our fellows, that our fellows are leaders. They are bringing innovative justice, education in the context of prisons and in communities. That is the model that we want to learn from, as opposed to saying, oh, because this is the US, it must be doing it right. There is a lot that is very wrong happening in the US. And so, again, I think that's central to our idea of transnational solidarity and working across borders. We want to take what's working, what's powerful in various nations, and learn from each other and collaboratively, as opposed to just saying this one country has the answer with regard to justice or really anything else.
Mr. Ngxeke, so if we say the fellowship's curriculum is going to be designed by people who've experienced incarceration and the criminal justice system, What are they saying? What are you gleaning from those that you interact with, that if we're talking about restorative justice, rehabilitative justice, for instance, I mean, we know that a lot of people who've been in jail, at least a significant number, end up going back to jail. But there must be, very cogent reasons for why people end up in prison. So is this going to be taken into account? What is the discussion about a curriculum that'll keep people out of prisons?
Yes, no, thank you very much. And that's an interesting question that you're asking. Because one of the things that we're talking about, I think that Bear has also highlighted, it's about restorative justice first. Now, the restorative justice is primary focus. It's all about healing, not healing the victim, but also healing the perpetrator, and how to prepare the perpetrator and the community as he's becoming back. And the second conversation that we have is the conversation about the language, the usage of the language, how we use the language. Sometimes the language that we are using, it tends to implicate that people cannot change. Whereas we know that, languages that are derogatory or language that are not humanizing human beings, they tend to place them in the same situations that they were in. I think I've got a load shedding, guys.
It's okay, you can continue, as long as we can hear you. Okay.
Yes, that they were in before they were arrested. So that is the kind of conversations that we have. And then besides that, we also try to highlight a manifesto of a way forward. What are the things that we would love people to know about? What are the things that we would love the world to know about? What are the things that the correctional service community would love to know about? Interestingly, one of our guys in fellowship highlighted something yesterday when we were in one of the prisons. He says that, sometimes the correctional officers, they tend to forget that they are being stewards of transformation, and the lives are in their hands of people, how they are going to impact the community in a negative way or in a positive way.
Mr. Ngxeke, that's such a powerful statement. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I do want to ask Dr. Dreisinger this one question, and it follows up perfectly from what Mr. Ngxeke said, this movement building strategies. And I want to use what we saw as the Black Lives Matter as a campaign that swept through the world. And of course, it had different contexts and it latched on to different issues in different countries. So what are you looking at to learn from campaigns like that to make sure that we all are indeed in solidarity in a safer world?
Well, I think, first of all, I should point out that per the last question, the very fact of recidivism rates around the world should indicate that prisons are not working. They're just revolving doors. And also that this fellowship is not about keeping the fellows out of prison. They have done that quite well themselves. They are leaders in their community. They've accomplished a tremendous amount. And I think the idea of this fellowship and of our work is exactly to create that kind of campaign where we're saying Black Lives Matter, incarcerated lives matter, formerly incarcerated lives matter. We are working very hard against the stigma that is holding people back when they come out of prison all over the world. And this fellowship is evidence of what happens when people are not held back and their incredible genius and potential is allowed to express itself fully, and how much that not only benefits them, but benefits us as a society by making us safer and more humane.